Are you purchasing eggs with bright orange colored yolks because you've been told that those are better for your health? Well, what if I told you that all the hype around orange yolks equaling better egg quality was actually wrong? In this video, I'm going to show you, in fact, I'm going to prove to you why those that continue to say this are simply parroting what they've been told and don't know the facts. To start off today's video, I want to share a story with you that is highly relevant to our topic today. So around 2020, here at Harvest Hills Ranch, we were able to make a transition from buying individual bags of feed to being able to buy feed on a larger scale. We had been able to grow our chicken operation in a way that allowed us to order much larger amounts of food at one time and have it custom made and have it delivered here to the farm under our specifications. Well, no doubt we were excited to be able to make this step, and when that first order of feed arrived here, like I always do, I started looking at the label that was on the bag. And when I say bag, this is not a 50-pound bag, this is a 2,000-pound tote bag that I'm referring to here. And I was excited about that because I felt like, all right, we're going to be able to give our custom formulation to our birds that we've been working on, and this is what we're going to be able to tout and move forward. And as I started looking through the ingredients, I started seeing things that, one, I didn't agree with, but two, that I saw terms that I had never seen before, which with 20 plus years of experience in the field of nutrition, I don't get caught off guard by some terms very often. I generally recognize what I'm seeing. So the fact that I saw a chemical in my feed that I didn't recognize really set me back. Needless to say, I called the feed mill, our representative for the feed mill, and had a very lengthy conversation with him and ultimately got that feed changed out. But here's what I learned from that. What had been added to our pastured bird, our laying bird's feed, was actually a food coloring agent. It's an agent that was in there with the intent of coloring the egg yolks. And it was not something that I had asked to be in the feed. It was just something that it was assumed that that was what was supposed to be in there, or that I wanted that in there, but I didn't. I'll explain why more about that here in just a second. So as I looked at this label, there was a chemical on that label that was labeled as ethoxyquin. Now we had the compound that's being used to color with, and then we had this chemical ethoxyquin. And ethoxyquin was the compound that I wasn't sure about. I hadn't come across this one before. Here's what I learned in researching ethoxyquin. Well, number one is that while ethoxyquin can be used in the United States, it is actually banned in the European Union. It was banned in the European Union in 2017, and it's also banned in other countries, Australia being an example of that. Ethoxyquin has been considered to be a carcinogen. It lacks safety data. Small repetitive exposure to it, as you might find when it's slowly introduced into the food supply, seems to be where the problem is. It's a total accumulation over time. And here's going to be the kicker that should get your attention, is that it was introduced in 1965 by a company named Monsanto. Now, if all of these things don't sound eerily familiar to what we also know to be as a story around glyphosate, they should, because it's a very similar story. But we're talking about the color of egg yolks today. So how does this play into it? Well, remember, in that feed that arrived at Harvest Hills Ranch, it contained ethoxyquin, which was a part of the coloring agent that was being added to color the yolks in the eggs that the birds on our ranch were going to lay. Fortunately, I stopped that before all this went into motion. But here's what really struck me with this. Let me fast forward a little bit after uncovering this story here at the ranch, is that I was presenting at a conference in October of 2021. And I brought this very topic up, and not one producer in that audience, not one, in an audience of well over 100 different ranchers and farmers, not a single individual was familiar with the term ethoxyquin or the fact that this could be a chemical that was being included in to what they're adding to the feed to give to their birds to color the yolks with. So as I move into, and let me say this is not the gist of this conversation at all today. I just wanted to start us off by telling you this story of how I, a person that is attentive to these facts about what comes onto our ranch, I scrutinize all this stuff. And I was almost duped on this. And when I really dug in and looked at the story behind this, it really opened my eyes about what we are looking at when we talk about the color of egg yolks. And so for you as the consumer, this is what I want to share with you today. I want to share with you what you aren't hearing out there. And when many are telling you that you need to be focused on these brightly colored orange yolks, I'm going to give you a different perspective on that I think is going to draw into question the narrative that you've been hearing. Now, the point being on this is that you cannot have these learning experiences unless you're in the trenches doing this stuff every day, which is why what the information I bring to you, it's different. It's coming from experience and book knowledge. It's not just coming from what I'm being told or what the common narrative or typical narrative is out there around better food. These are facts that you as the consumer need to know. So at this point, if I have piqued your interest so far, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button so that I can keep bringing you eye-opening content like this so that you're not going to be deceived by the food that you're buying and you can make better, more informed choices for you and your family. Now, let's get into this. Let's start off by asking the question, do orange yolks inform you about the quality of the egg that you're buying? Guys, the short answer to that question is no, it doesn't. It doesn't tell you about the quality of the egg. And so let me give you the reasons that it does not as we go through this. So the typical narrative that we hear is that bright orange yolks are only coming from pasture-raised eggs. Okay, you can only get these bright orange yolks if you're sourcing your eggs from pasture-raised eggs. So I'm going to point out four problems with this narrative. So let's dive into problem number one here. Problem number one is that there is no standard definition of what pasture-raised actually means. It is an obscure term, all right? So there is, in general, a hierarchy of terms here, an organization of terms that you've heard and that you need to understand what one means over the other. So we see terms like cage-free, we see free-range, we see pasture-raised. So cage-free simply means that that animal is not living in a cage. It doesn't mean that they're not living in some type of enclosed housing. It doesn't mean that they have access to the environment in any way, to their normal living conditions. It doesn't mean any of that. It simply means they're not living in a cage. So don't overread into that. When you look at the term free range goes beyond cage-free. So yes, they're cage-free and they're able to roam around, but there's nothing that speaks to the quality of the environment that they're roaming around in. And then you go to pasture-raised, and what pasture-raised should mean is that they are indeed out on pasture. It is the mental image that you have in your mind when you think about these birds and the eggs that they're producing in the environment that they're living in. That's what pasture-raised is. But the problem is that many individuals will take the term free range and confuse it with pasture raised, and the two are not the same. And in fact, the term pasture raised is not clearly defined by the USDA Food Safety and Inspection Service. And these are the guys that are doing all the oversight on the different terms that can be used on labels. There is no clearly defined definition for pasture raised. There is some potential that that's going to change in the near future, but at current, there is no clearly defined term for that. So the question you should ask here is that if that label says pasture raised, is that bird raised on pasture 10% of the time, 50% of the time, 100% of the time? You as the consumer don't have an answer to that. Here's the other thing that you need to know. What about the space allowance for those birds that are being out on pasture, are they allowed to just free roam? Do they have a very small confined area of pasture that they can stay in? If they're in a more limited area of pasture, are they moved across that pasture routinely? See, these are all questions that you're never going to be able to answer by looking at a label. And all of the individuals that are out there telling you that pasture raised and dying on the sword of the pasture raised term is that equates to these bright orange yolks don't understand the terminology that they're even promoting. That's problem number one. Problem number two with this concept about bright orange yolks equaling egg quality, guys, there is a natural ebb and flow to nature. Let me give you an example. Winter, spring, summer, fall. I can't give you a more clear example than the change of the seasons to illustrate this ebb and flow of nature. Nature is not consistent year round. And I want to be clear at this point in this video too, I am not speaking about tropical climates across the equatorial region of the globe. I am speaking to the United States of America, to the central portion of North America where we operate at and where we interact with other regenerative farmers and our consumers. Okay, so that's the region that I'm speaking to here. But when you look at these from an environmental standpoint, the environment is going to have the bright colored flowers predominantly in the spring. That's when all the regrowth starts to take place. That's when you see all the new flowers, all the new grasses come about. And so you're going to see this burst of colors that are more prevalent in the spring. They tend to move into the summer. They do tend to carry into the summer. But when fall rolls around, when winter rolls around, those are not predominating in the environment. And so if we're going to make the argument that the bright orange yolks are coming from what the chickens are eating on pasture, then, and assuming that that is from these colorful elements that are in the pasture, then we also have to acknowledge that those colorful elements are not in the pasture year round. And immediately you as the consumer should have a question that comes to mind: how do these yolks stay the same bright orange color year round? And am I actually being shown what the true environment of these animals that they're operating in is? And the answer to that question is no, you're not. Here's the other part to this, is that when you look at these wildflowers, this is where you have to look at what is actually growing in the pasture. When you see beautiful grasses, native grasses, even some improved grasses that flourish in these pastures, the more prairie type of look, that is the more ideal look. And the more ideal, the soil quality is more ideal. It's of a better quality at that point. When you see a lot of these flowers and different things, not that some of those won't grow and they're not naturally seen in that soil, growing in that soil, but the point is that if there is an overabundance of those, that is generally an indication that that is a weaker soil. It is not a highly nutritious, mineralized soil, because typically those grasses are further into the succession process. They're further down the line than a lot of these flowers are. The flowers are covering the ground very quickly to just put cover on the ground. But when you start seeing the grasses, that means you've moved on into the next phase, and you're not going to see there's predominantly green with these grasses for the most part. There's exceptions to that, but that's the predominant color, and you don't have the same carotenoid concentration in the grasses that you do in some of these flowers and other things that the birds may have exposure to. So when you look and see all those flowers like that, you really have to ask the question, well, what is the quality of the pasture? And again, back to the point here of problem number two, is there is an ebb and a flow of nature. And if you're seeing the same color yolk all year round, guys, you're not seeing the ebb and flow of nature. Something is being pulled over your eyes to disguise the reality of how those birds that are laying those eggs that you're buying are actually being raised. All right, that's problem number two, but there's four here. So let's get into problem number three. And problem number 3 is that for those that are out there espousing this narrative, that are standing on this, that orange yolks equal better quality mentality, they're ignoring comparisons that frankly disprove their narrative. So you never see them bring up the topic of these eggs that you find in the grocery store. A lot of times you'll see them in a clear carton, a clear plastic carton, and these are omega-3 enriched eggs, and they have brightly colored yolks. But guess what, guys? Those birds aren't being raised on pasture. So if they're not on pasture and they're just in a typical conventional laying facility, but yet they have the same bright colored orange yolks, what we often term as the Kubota color. If any of you have ever seen a Kubota tractors are a very bright orange. We call those yolks Kubota orange. Kubota orange is what we call those. But if you're seeing that in these birds that are not pasture raised, well, then how did they have such bright orange yolks if they're not pasture raised? They seemingly always ignore that part of the conversation. And here's where we go one step further. So the answer to how they have that, how they have that orange yolk goes back to the story that I led in with at the outset, is that there's compounds that are added in that are coloring agents. For example, look on the screen here. This is an example of one known as Oroglow. This is a very common one that's used out there in the industry. And also I want to note here that there is also an organic Oroglow. So if there's an organic Oroglow, what is in the conventional Oroglow that you or I wouldn't want to be consuming? So that's the things you've got to look at. And many times these coloring agents are coming from things like marigold, cayenne, paprika. These are typically the things that you see used as the coloring agent to make those yolks that brighter orange. And I was having a recent conversation, just to give you perspective behind the scenes here of conversations that take place between producers. I was actually at our processing facility for our meat birds, and I was having a conversation with another rancher, and we had this exact conversation that you and I are having today, and he acknowledged to me that I'm not a fan of including those coloring agents anyway, but my customers want it, and they don't want to buy my eggs if they don't have that bright orange color. But here's where the problem arises with that, is that means that we don't have a backbone to tell the truth about what we know. If we knowingly understand that coloring agent has the potential to induce a toxicity to my customer, I'm going to tell them that. I'm going to have the same conversation with them that I'm having with you right now. Here's the other problem with this. Many will say regarding these coloring agents that these are going to be a higher source of lutein, and that's good for the eyes. You've got these carotenoids that are in there. Well, let's really look at this for a minute in terms of the irony between the amount of lutein and these carotenoids that you find in these yolks compared to other sources. In fact, many of us, and I don't use corn in our feed formulations, but many people drag corn through the mud. And there are some attributes to the corn as the grass part of the plant, right? So not the grain part, but we're talking about the grain part here. Corn actually has a higher lutein content than eggs. So if you look at a corn, what actually makes corn yellow is the lutein. And if you're truly seeking out lutein, that really isn't the core reason you're eating eggs. If it is, there's better options for that. It's the totality of the nutrition in the egg is to the reason you're eating it. But you can get lutein from peppers, you can get it from tomatoes, parsley. There's all kind of other plants you can get it from. Kale, spinach. All of these plants contain lutein. So to say that we need these coloring agents in the yolks, and it's okay to give these to the birds, even if it introduces this ethoxyquin, which, by the way, we're just going to label that as a synthetic antioxidant. It's an antioxidant. No, it is a synthetic, and it is a synthetic that has been shown to be a carcinogen. So there's problems with it. It doesn't need to be there. There's other antioxidants in the yolk. You don't need ethoxyquin. So enough on that. But here we are. Let's just pause for a minute. Here we are. We're getting to the end. I'm about to roll into point number 4 with you. And if you're looking at this information and you're thinking, man, this is a whole different story than what I've been told. I cannot believe what I'm hearing. I want you to go to the comments down below, and I want you to put in the comments down below about your experience related to this topic that we're delving into here today. Okay, so that's problem number 3. Let's get into problem number 4 here. Problem number 4 is that pasture management is more important than the feed. Okay, pasture management is more important than the feed. So there is a difference in the style of production. It's not all about what they're being fed. So the real story comes down to animals that are pasture raised versus animals that are in confinement. All right, and then you go from there. And I want to share with you why looking at the pasture raised in the pasture raised segment. Okay, so in this pasture raised segment, what you feed the animal doesn't really make this dramatic difference like everybody thinks that it does. All right, so I was part of Harvest Hills Ranch. Was our birds, our feed formulation was part of a study. And what this study looked at was our feed formulation, another farm's feed formulation, and a third farm's feed formulation, all of which were different, all of which used non-GMO ingredients. And there was a fourth group in the study, which was the conventional off-the-store shelf egg. And what we found, and all of these feeds, let me just give credit where credit's due. All of these feeds, these non-GMO feeds, came from Rasaka Sun Feeds. And this is who we interacted with to be able to execute this study. And you know what we found with this is that the 3 different feeds used in the pasture-raised setting, the outcomes on the fatty acids of those different eggs was all basically the same. There were little nuanced differences here and there, but they were all basically the same. But when you compared each of those 3 against the typical conventional off-the-store shelf egg, drastically different. More omega-6s in the off-the-store shelf, fewer omega-3s, less oleic acid. This is not the direction you want to go. So the point is that the feed is not that much of a difference once these animals are appropriately raised on pasture. And this is not just related to fatty acid status as well. It's also related to the nutritional status. So for example, your nutrients, your fat soluble nutrients, your ADEK, these are all approximately about the same when it comes to the different ways that the pasture raising versus confinement. That's really where the difference is at on this. And even when you look at some of the studies that have been done on this, one of the things that you'll see is that, look at this study right here. This is a study that is used to really drive the point home for many. And what this study actually says when you read into it is that this study is being completely misused by all the people that are out there touting it. It doesn't reference yolk color at all. All it references is the nutritional quality of the eggs, not the yolk color being an indication of nutritional quality of the egg. The study looks at nutritional value, not yolk color. And I want to highlight this last statement in this study, which looks at how these birds, that the birds on pasture had a lower weight than your confined birds. Yes, and this is the reason that you have to use feed with these birds, is because otherwise, if these birds don't eat that feed, they're high energy demanding animals. If you let them continue to lose weight, guys, that's called starvation. That is not in the interest of animal welfare. So does feed make sense for these birds? 100% that it does. Does it affect nutritional quality? Not in the negative way that you're being told that it does. In fact, all that matters really is that these animals are being raised on pasture. So the bottom line, yolk color does not reflect the management of the ducks or chickens. Because everything that I've said in this, even though I've been focusing on chickens, also applies to ducks and what we do here. So what's the concern? Well, there's minimal definition of pasture raised used to make these claims. And for the most part, we're not seeing optimization of nutrition in a confinement setting. We want to get these animals on pasture, which is how we raise them, and that's where you'll see the improvement in nutritional quality. So you cannot conflate egg color, nutritional status, and pasture raised is all equaling the same thing. They don't. All right, so let's just draw the line in the sand in that, and I will stand on that hill and make that claim. Now, here's what you need to look for, and here's the other way that you're being misled on this. So let's get to the point of what you as the consumer need to be looking for. You've been told that there are two egg colors, that there are these poor, anemic looking yellow eggs and these egg yolks, and that there are these bright, robust orange egg yolks, the Kubota orange that I led you to earlier, or told you about earlier. And that is not true. There is actually three. There is a third here. So you're seeing the ends of the spectrum is what you're being told. You're not being told about what's in the middle, which is where reality should be keeping us at and where you should be focused at. On one end, you're being told, and all these videos like to use these poor pale colored yolks that they've pulled off from eggs off the shelf. Yeah, that's true. There is a weakness in those eggs, most likely, but it has to do with how the animals are being raised. As far as the color of the yolks, these bright orange ones, that's at the other end. But guys, you can also have a nice, rich yellow yolk, which is the color it inherently should be. Might it lean a little more orange in the spring and in the early summer to midsummer? Yes, it may. Great if it does, right? But what you're looking for is that deep, rich yellow yolk. That is an optimal egg. That is an egg that can be produced year-round without having coloring agents added to that. Now, here's the next thing you need to do. I'm trying to keep you going and trying to keep you educated so you can get the quality you're looking for in these eggs. The next thing you need to do is when you have a conversation with the person that's raising your eggs, you need to ask if they're raising their birds on pasture, understand what that means, and are they in a mobile structure where they're moving around that pasture routinely? And then does the feed that they're giving, does it contain a coloring component to it specifically for or designed for the enhancement of increasing the color of those yolks? And if it does, the next question you need to be asking is, well, do you know if that coloring agent does not contain a synthetic agent potentially named ethoxyquin that has been used and labeled as a synthetic antioxidant but is also a carcinogen? That's the question you need to follow up with. And I have a funny feeling, and I'm not proud of this, but I have a funny feeling that many are going to get a deer in the headlights look. They're going to glass their eyes over because you're going to be asking them something that they have not heard. And you as the consumer need and deserve an answer to that. So, after listening to this information, are you confident in the information that you've been receiving about eggs, especially those that are out there that are telling you you've got to get the bright colored egg yolks? That's what you should be seeking out. Are you confident in that information that they've been giving you? I'm hoping you're questioning that at this point. So, if I have shaken your paradigm and you're ready to learn more, here's a video on the difference between organic and grass-fed beef. Oh, and by the way, if you live in Southeast Texas and you want quality food, go visit HarvestHillsRanch.com, where transparency and facts reign true.